Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to be able to share something very special with all the Airbnb hosts tuned into this live webinar. Our topic today is how to become a superhost, presented by Evan Kimbrell, one of Airbnb's top superhosts in San Francisco. He's going to be discussing his top tips for Airbnb hosting, how to automate your rental unit. And side note, Evan is joining us from Asia today, and his rental unit is in San Francisco, so he's a very deep expert on this topic here. And how to keep yourself and your stuff safe. And lastly, how to make big strides into becoming a superhost in your area. First things first, viewers, we're going to cover a lot today. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can email them to us at info@learnairbnb.com. You can see the email on the screen right there. All right, so let's get into it. Evan has a very successful Airbnb business in San Francisco, as I mentioned before. He has been hosting for a few years and has even made an Airbnb host training course to help others. Today we get to sit down and pick Evan's brain about all things Airbnb hosting. Live listeners, please stick around until the end of the webinar. We have a very special offer for you. We promise it'll be well worth your time. So without further delay, I'd like to invite Evan to give us his insight and tips on how to become a superhost for Airbnb. So Evan, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Everybody who's listening, thanks for showing up, especially you guys on the West Coast. I know how ridiculously early it is right now. You guys are really champing it out. If you guys have any questions as I'm doing this, just type them in and send them to Jim, and we can get to them at the end. I know sometimes I get a little excited and I talk a little too fast. So I put together a little bit of just a presentation about some of the questions that people ask me all the time, some of the questions that people ask Jim on Learn Airbnb. And I want to start off by talking about how I got into Airbnb, because that's a question that a lot of people ask me. It's always fun to like hear the genesis story, because everybody has their own story. And you know, when you hear someone else describing how they got into it, kind of like brings back some nostalgia, some memories of how maybe you found it and how it's potentially changed your life. So yeah, as Jim said, I'm in San Francisco. That's where my Airbnb is. That is like ground zero for Airbnb. That's where Airbnb headquarters is. That's where they first started. That's where San Francisco has been all over the news with Airbnb in the last 6 months. It's really kind of a hotbed for it. So my story, you know, it's very similar to like a lot of people moving to San Francisco. I'm self-employed. I make websites. I have a web development firm, and we put together websites. And someone who's self-employed, I don't know if any of you guys listening are self-employed, but it's just brutal sometimes. Some months are miserable. I mean, sometimes you go through deserts, and sometimes you're just on unbelievable highs. And so, I mean, I was moving out to San Francisco, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but San Francisco is, I believe, you can correct me, the most expensive city in the country for rent. And I just pulled this off of Zumper. The average one bedroom in San Francisco right now is $3,400. When I moved out to San Francisco, it was like 2.5, 3 years ago, and the average one bedroom, I think, was like $2,800 a month. Like a steal, right? A bargain. And now it's only gotten worse. And I kind of had a little bit of a crisis when I came here. San Francisco's a fantastic city. It's a great place if you're in tech, if you're a young professional, if you're interested in working for startups, and then also if you're interested in the culture and kind of the scene of San Francisco. It's very iconic. But there's a problem. I mean, it's a city that you have to break your bank account to live in. I mean, I know people who make $70,000 a year, and it's like, congratulations, you can sleep in someone's kitchen because you need to put 4 people in a 2-bedroom because your rent is just out of this world. And so I kind of had a little bit of a crisis when I first moved here, and I was like doing how long I could last here. And it was not pretty. It was just one of those things, like if I had a couple months, I don't really know what my parachute plan was. So, you know, I tried to make do with what I had. I tried to look for cheaper areas, and I moved to this area called Fisherman's Wharf. And if anybody's been a tourist in San Francisco, you've probably been to this area. And if you're a local in San Francisco, you probably just rolled your eyes when I said Fisherman's Wharf. it's like sometimes I feel like I'm living in Disneyland. Like it's kind of that. There's only so many times that you can walk, eat at the Rainforest Cafe, or so many times that you can go to Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, or you run out of pennies that you can smash into novelty coins. That's kind of the area I'm in. It's just like a tourist place. It's beautiful, but it's something that locals don't really want to live in. And I ended up in here because it's like, I'd say it's about 30% cheaper than the other areas. I mean, we can go back to that map up here. It's like a mid-range one. They lump it into North Beach. Even this map doesn't care about Fisherman's Wharf. It's right here. But it's in between these two. So it's still, astronomical by normal people's standards. But for San Francisco, it's kind of like middle of the road. So this probably makes no sense out of context, but the way I came out onto Airbnb actually was because, it's actually because I love talking about the rent problem in San Francisco and how just ridiculous it is. And I'm lucky because I complained about it so much. And, my friends and my girlfriend just tell me like, oh, we've heard this story like 10 times, Evan. But people would always suggest like, hey, maybe you should think about using Airbnb. And they'd say, oh, you can rent out your living room for $50 or, $75 or whatever. And the idea was like, they take the sting off your rent. The problem was that when they said that, it never really occurred to me that I could pay my rent with Airbnb. I figured like, oh, I can do $300 a month. That's not really helpful when your rent is so astronomically high. And my rent was, it's $3,000, and I think it's risen to $3,100 now. So that's not really something that, it doesn't really factor into the calculus. Like, it's not like, oh, that's my white knight kind of situation. Kind of ignore them. And what ended up happening was I wanted to come out to San Francisco. We started looking at hotels, and we started looking at these hotels, and like all these hotels around my area were like $400 a night. Holiday Inn, $400 a night. Hyatt, $50 a night. All these places, even like hotels like Travelodge and things like that, were just not very nice. The eureka moment for me that really kind of brought me to Airbnb was actually, I was like walking home from, I don't even remember where, probably just groaning in my head about my rent situation. And I passed by this motel, this ugly, dumpy motel that is right next to my apartment. It is about a block away. And just out of the, I don't even know what inspired me, I walked in and asked about how much it cost. And, motels, like the man/woman grunts at you, $275 a night, which I remember her telling me that. And I said, what, for a motel? And then I asked her, do you have any vacancies? And she said, no. And I was like, well, how long booked out? And it was the whole month. That was where I kind of realized something. And that was that, wait a second, if I'm a block away from this place in a nicer space, in a full apartment, surely someone would pick that over this dumpy motel, price gouging people on purpose. And that's where I kind of made the connection. And I know a lot of prospective Airbnb hosts out there. They kind of have this problem when they think about getting on Airbnb. They don't think that their space has value. And they look around them and they're like, I live here. Why would anyone pay to live here? Or pay to live in an area that's decorated with my stuff? I had that same problem. And it wasn't until I had one of the more extreme examples like this dumpy motel, to kind of knock me into my senses, which was that my apartment has value. And surely if I'm struggling to find a place for my parents, people are also looking for a place, and they don't want to pay $400 a night to stay at the Holiday Inn or $275 to stay at this place. And that's how I got to it. I honestly did this whole thing like a week and a half. I am a total nerd. I worked, I've been in startups pretty much my entire life. And so I'm big into like testing and data, and I'm really kind of obsessive about the details of things I do. And I ended up spending way too much time on my listing. But I really kind of dove into it. I started looking around the area. I started studying other people's looking at amenities, kind of studying what people were doing right. I mean, I was looking at my competitors, and I would practically memorize some of the reviews. It's kind of into it I got. And that's how I do it. I listed up my space, And I had a decent reaction. I think my first month, I rented out, I got maybe $1,000. And it just kind of steadily rose from there as I started learning things, as I started testing things out, as I started coming up with ideas and trying to implement them, and as I became more experienced. There's a huge knowledge gap between hosts who have been hosting for a while and have been in the dirt for a while, and people are completely new to this. There's a lot of skill and a lot of nuance to it. And so where I'm at today, that is a screenshot of my backyard. That backyard right there, man, that looks so much better than the backyard I've ever sat in. But that's the magic of photography. Today, I've been well over 300 plus guests. Originally for a long time, I thought that San Francisco was just an oddity in terms of how great of an opportunity this is for hosts. And now I've actually helped launch 5 different properties. So I've helped launch properties in Oakland, not too far. I've launched them in Buenos Aires, Baltimore, Denver, Colorado, and even itty bitty Lawrence, Kansas. So and every single one of those properties has absolutely blown out of the water the profit expectations. So my full-time listing started off at $200, and I've been hosting for 1.5 years now. And now the average I rent it out for is about $450. It's not unreal. It's not untypical that I have a night where I'm getting paid $600 a night to rent it out. And this is actually just recently, about 4 months ago, basically a accumulation of everything I put together, all the tips and tricks and techniques and really everything. I now am actually #1 in San Francisco whenever you search just generically for the city for 3+ guests. And even if you search for 2, I show up. It was actually, and that's why I say it's like Christmas coming early. And I remember about 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, I reposted my listing. I rent it out every summer. Every summer I travel. So I travel for 3 months every year. Last year I went to Bali and Borneo. Right now I'm in Thailand. And I'm doing small little trips into China and then did Taiwan and et cetera, et cetera. But so I listed it and I popped it up because I was like, ready for the summer season. And I popped it up and did, it was in 5 days, I booked $21,000. And that is just, like I said, accumulation of pretty much everything I put together. That is essentially that whole experience I've taken and thrown into a course. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And this was a little proof shot. I like to keep this one. I should make this like my desktop background or something. It's just like my little badge of honor. And I did this in all sorts of different dates and all different guest settings and et cetera, et cetera. And I even thought like maybe I'm search #1 because I'm logged into my account. And that. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, and Jim's asked me to address the questions that you guys have specifically. I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for starting out. And I want to make a distinction here. When I'm talking about tips for starting off, I'm talking to you guys who are prospective hosts, people who are thinking about their space and really hoping that they can have the best launch they can. Like, I know everybody out there wants to list this and they want to start making money as soon as possible, and they want to have the best experience possible. A lot of people don't want to hear that, it could take time. I mean, to get to where I was, it took 2.5 years and 2.5 years of trial and error. So I'm going to focus these 5 tips on starting out. Like when I launch a property, what do I do? And what do I do that's worked consistently? Because now whenever I launch a property, I can get onto the first search page easily within like a month. I mean, easily. A lot of times it's been 2 weeks. Maybe more competitive areas, 6 weeks, 2 months. If I relisted my apartment now, I think it would probably maybe 3 or 4 months to get to the front page as opposed to 2.5 years. So I'm going to focus these on people starting out. And I'm trying, there's a lot of things I'm not going to talk about because like best practices, I think are a lot of like common sense. I try as much as possible to give you the uncommon information, the kind of things that you never really would have thought about, or things that are just not standard, things that only someone who has been doing this for a long time and really, really trying and iterating knows about. So it's called your booking to inquiry ratio. Now, a lot of you, even like normal hosts out there who have been hosting for a while, don't even know what this is. Now, there's a concept you need to understand that a lot of companies use whenever they have search listings. Airbnb, Udemy is an example. They use a concept called velocity. And velocity is a ratio never, but it is this X factor you don't realize. And what it is they take the amount of time that it takes you from launch to getting to a point where you're acquiring booking, acquiring inquiries, page views, and reviews. And the gold standard, like the golden rule, everything, it comes down to this one, booking to inquiry ratio. That is how you maximize your search ranking. And I'm always amazed at how many people have never heard of this. So what this is it's whenever time you get an inquiry, you see it all the time, right? Someone asks you a question. Sometimes it's in terrible English. Sometimes it's horribly incomplete. Sometimes it's their entire life story. You need to focus on the ratio of how many inquiries you take and how many you book, okay? Now, you have to think about it from Airbnb's perspective. When Airbnb is deciding who to list in their search results, who do you think they want to show? Do you want to show, say, a property that books 50% of their people, the people that send an inquiry? Or do you think they want to send it to someone who books 90%? So that's something you need to keep into mind. And I honestly, whenever I help people with their listings, I try to tell them that it's very, very important that you plan to cast your net as wide as possible if you want to maximize your earnings and maximize your experience. Now, if you're someone who is only trying to do this part-time, then you still want to pay attention to your booking to inquiry ratio, but you will take a little bit more of a nuanced approach to it. You aren't going to be accepting every single person. You're going to have to be more mindful about your calendar. And you're going to keep in mind things like don't ever decline guests. Do not ever decline guests, guys. If you're hearing this, write this down. It's never worth it for you to do that. That always hurts you. But in general, make sure that you are being mindful of how many people you're booking and how many people are asking you about your property or about your space. I personally try to book literally everyone. And that is why my search ranking is so killer. So that's a huge, huge metric. And actually kind of the rest of the tips kind of lead into that. That's why I wanted to start with it. The second tip I would say for someone starting off is that, so first of all, be aware of competitively when you first start off. When you first list your Airbnb, you're going to be in like search page 8, right? Like I have hosts all the time that come to me and say like, I listed my property. I'm not getting any page views at all. I can't even find my property. Okay, I mean, that's true. And that's because you don't have social proof. You don't have a review base and you don't have bookings on and you don't even have that conversion ratio up above. And so the thing is that you need to focus on what are the things that you can manage, okay? If you land on search page 8, you're brand new, what are the things that you can use to your advantage versus every other host out there? Every other host has reviews. Every other host has social proof. They have references. They have, Airbnb is giving them search juice. But what can you do? One of the things you can do makes a huge difference is your response timing. And now I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before if you read a lot about Airbnb, but I don't think you understand how important it really is. So a lot of people say like, oh, you need to respond within an hour. Okay, I'm not actually talking about that metric that shows up on your host profile. On your host profile, if you guys are looking at an Airbnb page and you go to the bottom, it'll say how often they respond. And it should be 100% if you're trying to be competitive. You're taking this seriously. And it should say how fast they respond. And the absolute best it can say is within an hour, right? And so a lot of hosts go and they say, oh, well, as long as they respond within 55 minutes, I always have that badge of response time. But you need to take it a little bit farther, okay? The way I do it, and I did all the testing on this, so you guys don't have to. It's kind of ridiculous, but this is who I am. I'm a little too analytical for my own good. What I started doing was I was testing when people message me. And sometimes I'd respond in like a minute. Sometimes I respond in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 hours. And I'd see how many actual. Now, think about it. When someone messages you, chances are they probably messaged like 5 other properties, right? I mean, if you've ever looked on Airbnb, you probably messaged multiple properties. One thing that this is what I realized from testing this constantly, is just how important this is. If they message 5 properties and you're like number 4 or 5 on their list in terms of their ideal spot, if you respond immediately within 10 minutes, within 5 minutes, you are 4 times as likely to book them. Now, I mean, and you just think of it from a consumer standpoint. I do this all the time. Like, if I'm renting out a space, say I'm renting it out for a family vacation, I message 5 people. One of the worst things about Airbnb is I have to wait, right? Like hotels, I can just book it and I'm done. If someone responds immediately, I can have a conversation with them and get information from them before I even hear from the other ones. Chances are, and I'd say 60, 70% of the time, I'm always going to go to responder. Now, the way that you can kind of accelerate your ability to respond very quickly is get a smartphone. Honestly, if you don't have a smartphone, hopefully we're at an age where like everybody has a smartphone and you're not walking around with a feature phone like a Motorola Razr. But get a smartphone and attach your phone to it. Use the text messages. Airbnb will send you push notifications. They also send you text messages. You can respond to text messages long before you can respond to the push notifications on the Airbnb app. But anyway, you need to get a phone. When you get a phone, actually try being tied to it. Try checking with it frequently. I know that kind of drives people crazy, but you can tell yourself this is a business thing, right? Like, I'm just trying to be successful. I'm trying to pay my rent. That's why I'm checking my phone. And trust me, they'll understand. But if you can honestly respond within a minute, 2 minutes, you will go from that page 8 nobody to all of a sudden this page 8 nobody with 0 views who's booking 50% of the people that they're getting inquiry from. That is a really great way to accelerate your search ranking kind of movement or your search ranking growth. Okay, so number 3, upgrade your photos. This is another one that you hear quite often, but I want to get a little more in depth with it. So that's another thing that you can use as a against other hosts that are not nearly as brand new as you, people who are established. Now, when someone sees your listing, and this is one of the biggest problems I see with new hosts, there are so many people out there who post their listing, put a picture of their room, always in portrait, right? They don't realize how bad portrait displays on Airbnb's website. And they put, maybe 2 photos. And they're shocked when no one asks to stay at their place. Okay, well, I mean, obviously, anyone who's hosted before knows that. Like, why would you stay at a place that only has 2 photos? If honestly they didn't take the effort to take 3 photos or to click the shutter button 4 times, why would you want to stay there? What does that say about the host experience? So try to focus on getting out of the gate with the best photos you can. And the way that I do this, and you don't have to be super rich or super 1%er to be able to come off with great, fantastic studio quality photos. I mean, I'll let you in on a little secret. This is how I did it. And when I started, again, I was trying to watch my budget, seriously. I actually just went to Costco because Costco has cameras, and I know that they have a 90-day return policy for any reason, any condition. And then I went to Target, and I knew that they had a 15-day policy, any reason, any condition on lenses. And so literally that's all I did. I went, got a fancy camera, put it on my credit card, and I don't feel bad because I shop at Costco all the time, so they make more money off me. And I used my fancy camera, and this is a tip that I learned later, flash bulb attachment. If you guys don't know what that is, go and search for flash bulb attachment. Flash bulb attachments are how they get your photos so bright, by the way. And I went and I got a wide angle lens because I knew that wide angle looks good in furniture, looks good indoors. And I had a DSLR camera. Went, took all my photos in one day, and then returned it the next day. My photos alone were enough to get inquiries the first day I posted. I even had people mentioning, hey, you have great photographs. Now, a lot of people out there who are established hosts know that Airbnb will do your photographs for you. This is true. But what you also don't know is that you probably stumbled upon that after you got to a certain point where you already have enough reviews that they're willing to come out and do this for you. You have to get to a certain point in your hosting before they'll send a photographer out there. I mean, they're not going to send a photographer to anybody who thinks they're willing to host. They're going to send it out to people who actually put the effort into hosting and who are serious about doing this. So there's this kind of this in-between where, you know, it could honestly, if you have a bad start, you could have 6 weeks, 2 months before they deem you qualified to send their photographer out who takes all your photos in honestly like 20 minutes. This is a great stopgap. It's a great way to get your photos in between. It's much, much better than an iPhone. And it's still not as good as their photos, but it's very close. And I go into seriously depth into this in my course. I even show you how Airbnb, and I figured this out just from having off the record conversations, how they make your photos look like so saturated and so with so much like oomph to them. You guys have looked at the photos, they look unnaturally good, don't they? I always call it like putting the MSG in your photos. Like it's just, there's something tasty about their photos. So yeah, that's a huge one. And that's something that if you plan correctly, you can take advantage of right out of the gate. That's gonna give you that velocity that we talked about. Higher velocity will just slingshot you forward. Augmentable amenities, and this is something I cover absolutely in depth in my course. This is something that if you're coming from my course, you probably are like rolling your eyes because I talk about this so much. I'm in love with augmentable amenities. But what I mean by this is everyone who's running out their space is probably thinking to themselves, like, I can't compete against people who have these systematic advantages. People, you know, if you don't have a hot tub or you don't have extra space or you don't have really nice fixtures, or maybe you only have 1 bathroom as opposed to 2, you're gonna think that, well, I can't compete with other people. Well, there's ways that you can make up for that. And this is just honestly a long process of me experimenting. I started experimenting with like, what are things that I can pay for that are external to my apartment, or things I can add that can dramatically change how many people see my listing, how many people book, dramatically change the value add when people read my listing and stay at my place. 2 of my favorites are the airbed and the parking. Airbed. So I'm sure you know your Airbnb airbed and breakfast. The whole idea was you set up an airbed in your living room and host people for conventions. But there's actually something somewhat to that. So one of the things I experimented with is that I have a 3-bedroom apartment. Technically it's 2, but I listed it as I have a very large living room, convert it to a 3rd bedroom. One of the things I started experimenting with was how many more page views and inquiries do I get if all of a sudden, as opposed to being able to host 6 people, I can host 8 or 9. And what I realized is absolutely massive growth in terms of how many people could see your listing. But also, when you get up into these higher categories of booking 6, booking 8, booking 9, the competition up there where the air is thin is minimal because people just can't really compete with that. And so that's why the airbed is absolutely brilliant. And in my course, I talk about, I literally go, and there's a video of me jumping on airbeds. And I talk about what exactly you need to get in an airbed. And there's 2 main objections that people have to this. One is airbeds are not comfortable. People are paying a lot of money to stay here. Now, I would challenge you, because if you were to stay on my airbed, and this is a fancy airbed, it's a Seagate. No, it's not a Seagate. That's a hard drive company. It's a Front Gate. It's a Front Gate bed. It actually is like a spinoff of I think it's like the Sharper Image. You know, that company that's like Sky Mall. But anyway, it was a very expensive purchase. It was like a $400, $500 bed. And it's a queen, flip a switch, and it literally assembles itself. Now, something that I'd learned from my grandma actually taught me this. All your true wisdom comes from, it's always your grandparent. She taught me that, you know, if you have an airbed and you put a topper on top of it, like 90% of people can't even notice the difference between that and sleeping on a normal queen bed. They're gonna notice it's not a Tempur-Pedic or what is it, like the Casper bed. I think it's an airbed. And so it's kind of a hack. Like you can really all of a sudden go from, I went from listing 6 people to 8 people by having this inflatable bed. And all of a sudden, I think I added 60% to my views pretty much overnight. And jump in view means 60% jump in bookings. And I have a per person fee. So my per night got higher and higher and higher. The other one was parking. Man, it was just, I turned the absolute corner when I did that. If you can start off right off the bat and offer parking, especially in that's huge. In cities like, oh, I don't have parking. Yes, but there are parking garages around you. So what you can do is you can go and add a parking spot and offer it to your guest. I mean, I added parking, I think quite literally like, hey, if you went and looked at my bookings over the last year and a half, solid 4 mentioned the parking spot as a reason they huge. I mean, and obviously this doesn't work for every single person. Like if you live in an area that everyone has parking, it doesn't really matter. But these are augmentable amenities. Like, do you live near a gym? Okay, can you get guest passes for your guests? All of a sudden, you have gym access. Look for those things that you can add. These are like, look at your amenity list, see the things you can't change, and try to think of things that you can actually add in. Those will make a huge difference towards how many views you get, how many bookings you get, your inquiry to booking ratio, and then velocity. And then your velocity, you know, you go off and it's all rainbows and puppies and all that. All right, number 5, use a no-brainer pricing strategy. So one of the problems a lot of people have when they start hosting is that they start thinking that they think to themselves, like, what is my space worth? I don't know what I should list my space for. They have the same problem that I talked about before, where you just don't think your space has any value. And you just don't know where to start. Like, what do I say? $200, $20? Is that too low? You get this like analysis paralysis. And what I do is I always just tell people, start with a pricing strategy that is just like a duh. And what I mean by duh, like if someone looked at your price, it needs to make immediate sense. And I offer, I'll give you 3 examples of how you can do that. In my course, I have like 8, but I go into more depth with it. One of them is look on Expedia or Hotwire. I think they're all like the same parent. Look at what it costs for a 1-bedroom. Look at what it costs for a 2-bedroom. And then calculate what, in your head, how much you think you could charge for 2 people or 4 people or whatever the equivalent is. Look at their amenity list and then try your best to match every single amenity they have, okay? They have hot water. Good, you have hot water. A curling iron and a steamer. Great, too. If any little amenity you can think of that they expect in a hotel, try to match that. And if you can match that space, like that hotel near you, that's an equivalent space, and then lower your price, anyone who's looking at those 2 will know which one to book. They'll know to book with you because they're getting the same exact thing. Never mind all the intrinsic benefits to Airbnb, such as like having a host or having the local lowdown. They'll book with because you're cheaper and better or level. The alternative to that, what you can do also is you can also beat their amenities. Look at the hotel right next to you. Beat what they have. Add something else. Go and, not saying go and buy a hot tub, but there are a lot of augmentable amenities you can add in. And then match your price. So just match it to what they're doing. Then, again, it's a no-brainer. This place is better. This place is worse. And the other thing I say is find a comparable property in your area and do the same thing to them. Look for someone who has a decent amount of review base, who has the most similar property to you. So in my course, I call it your doppelganger. But really, it's just like you want to find your arch rival kind of thing and try to beat them. My arch rival's name was Lance. And you want to their amenities and then match their price. And as a starting off property, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, that's how you overcome your lack of social proof, your lack of head start. Okay, and then I have, you were not expecting a bonus tip, I'm sure. Bonus tip, this is something that I only suggest for the people who are pretty serious about this, who really, really want to make money and make money faster. It's don't make money your first month. Now that sounds counterintuitive, but actually it's not. Now, if you understand the concept of velocity that I was just talking about, what I always suggest is focus on that. And so what you can do this month is quite literally go and calculate what you think the cost is. Just literally the cost. Like, what's the cost of my utilities? What's the cost of my rent? What's the cost of my mortgage or whatever? What's the cost of the individual things that I do for them, or the individual we call variable cost? And charge that. Okay, now, in order to make it so that people don't just run away with this, next month, 10%. And the next month, add 30%, 40%. The idea is that if you do this for your first month, you are artificially subsidizing your space. Someone sees it, it is at an artificial price point. No one can compete with that. It's obvious. You're just gonna book. Everyone's gonna book. It's almost a fire sale. Like, everyone's gonna go for it. And then what you do is you focus on review-based. Focus on closing the gap between you and the rest of the hosts. And this is honestly my favorite thing. I mean, it's just, this is how you slingshot your listing, because you just have a 6-week period or 4-week period, and you can stomach that, where you are not making any margins. You honestly, after 6 weeks, will have more traction than your comparable property has in 2 years. A strategy that I love using. I go into more depth, but that is sufficient for you guys to understand that concept. Okay. The second thing that Jim asked me to talk about was making things run smoothly. Now, this is more for people who are running it right now, and maybe you guys are getting a little burned out. Maybe you're worried about how much time spending. Just honestly, when I go on vacation, well, and it's been for the last 6 weeks, and it will be for the next 6 weeks. And I don't have, I have internet connection, my phone doesn't work. And I'm managing pretty much everything. Funny story, I actually went and spent a month in Cuba. I'm American, so if you ever find yourself talking to Homeland Security, this conversation never happened. But I spent a month there, and if you know anything about Cuba, they don't have internet. I think there's 2 places in the entire island that have Wi-Fi. And that Wi-Fi only allows 4 or 5 people to be attached to it at a time. To get internet, you have to wait in line, and you usually have to wait in line like an hour to then buy overpriced internet that lasts 15 minutes. So in the course of a month, I checked my internet, not even just my email, my internet, because internet wasn't even fast enough to load my email, 4 times a month. And I had it booked out, it was like 90% fill rate for that month. So it's possible. It is very possible to put this on autopilot if you want to. And so I'll cover kind of the tips I used to put together a system to do that. And this is a question I get a lot because a lot of people are drawn, like, always posting about how I'm in Bali, this is the money I made this month and things like that. And they want to know how that's possible. Because a lot of people have Airbnbs and they're like, this is way too active. And a lot of people have guides I've read, they say like, Airbnb can't be passive. Okay, well, it can be passive. And there's some things to make it more passive. And if you really want to go to the extreme, you can make it fully automated. So number 1, compiling incident lists using, so if you know what a VA is, that's a virtual assistant. When I say compile incident list, I'm such a nerd, but this is what I did. And this is one of the things that hosts and new hosts, it's a huge gap of information. A lot of new hosts just don't know this, but for people who've been hosting, have been around the block for a while, we know that like 99% of the interactions we have with our guest, or the mandatory interactions we have with our guest, really only fall into like maybe 10 different categories. I mean, this is what I literally did, is I started taking an incident list. Every time I was messaged about something, I took a note of what it was about. And then I wrote a response, and I made a template. And after about a year and about 150 guests or whatever, I had come together with a list that I was pretty happy with. I thought covered pretty much anything. And that gave me a really good idea of what exactly goes wrong in my apartment, so I can address them, see if I can get a permanent fix so it never pops up again, or what are the things that are just always going to pop up. And so I always need to be able to address them And are any of these things that like require me to be in person? And that's the end goal. You want to get to the point where none of these incidents require that you be there in person. Now, the second part of this, the 1-2 punch, is you can use virtual assistants. If you're not familiar with that, there's a lot of people you can hire online who can use these templates, use these directions, and do responses for you. This is a great way also of being able to maximize your response rate while you sleep too. If someone from Europe is trying to book your place, you can't respond if you're asleep, but a virtual assistant can. But what you can use them for primarily is that they look for incidents. They look for a message, they get messaged, and you pay them per incident, and you give them a template. And they know, and you can train them very, very easily, to understand when something's different or something's popped up that they've never seen before. And so these are very multifaceted. I mean, and when I talk about virtual assistant, honestly, it could be someone who lives in your area who wants to do it, who's always changing their phone. It could be someone in the Philippines who's just available 16 hours a day. There's a lot of different things you can use. I typically use things like Odesk, and there's a lot of other firms that I suggest in the course that are very useful and are kind of primed for this. But it's not something that takes a large amount of time. But once you have enough experience and you know what the incidents are, very easily you can pass this over to an automated system where someone can just send templates. And that at least kind of, if there is a problem, it essentially fixes 90% of it at a time until you can respond. So number 2, guide video tours. Guidebooks, wow. These are absolutely insane. And this is probably why you might have heard this before, is because they're just such an amazing hack. Guidebooks, so what I mean by this is every time someone shows up to your place, they are, number 1, interested in how your space works. And number 2, interested in what there is to do around the area. Now, anybody watching for a while, you guys probably have like a script in your head that you've gone through, right, with every single guest. I literally got to the point where I was like, I had memorized my script every time I was checking in a guest. I don't even have like the same suggestions and the same like punchlines and stuff. But you guys know exactly what people ask. You know what good restaurants there are. You know what trips are worth doing and what trips are not worth doing, right? These are all things you can compile into a guidebook. Now, when I say guidebook, typically people's eyes glaze over and they're like, oh, I don't want to create some high production value booklet. I'm not a publisher. I'm not a Kindle master. And actually, it's very, very simple. What you can do, and this is the way that I do it, and I always suggest doing it, is there are quite literally phone applications out there that you can create professional, bound, beautiful guidebooks for like $20, and you can make them on your phone. That's how simple they are. And honestly, the template I always use is you use a photograph from your space or from your area, you import it in, and put 1 sentence. It looks so, like chic and minimalistic. Really, you're just saving yourself tons of time. But what you can do is you can compile those. And honestly, like when I did this, I didn't realize at first that there were these mobile applications. But when I did find them, I started them, and like every time someone would like ask a question, or I gave them a new advice or a lot of times I get feedback, and they'd say, oh, that restaurant was blank. I'll import that into the guidebook, and then literally like every 3 months, I just reprint it. And after, like I said, 6 months, I basically had enough information that I could print off a guidebook. In that guidebook, it answered all sorts of questions like, how do you turn on the heat? How do you operate the oven? Does the door lock automatically? All of the things that people ask me. And that was the thing. I could just go back through my incident list and look at all the things that people ask me. And I put those together into a guidebook. It honestly in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because I'd written them all down. And I printed them off, delivered direct to my door. Those are fantastic. Those honestly will reduce your management time 70% of the time. Video tours. This is another thing that can really be helpful. No one does them. It's amazing. This blows my mind. What a video tour is when they book, or even as an incentive to get people to book, you can make a video tour of your space. Just walk around, film it, talk about things. And you could do two different things. And you do one, try to sell them on the property, or you could do another one, which basically shows them how to acquaint themselves, right? I'm walking up to the door. This is how I turn the key. This is, this is this room. This is this room. Here's the heat. Here's where I find the pots and pans. This is what I do with trash, right? And if you do that, not only does it make them 10 times more comfortable about your space and booking your space, but it reduces the amount of questions they have for you just considerably, right? Because a lot of people you get are older, or they're new to this whole thing. But they have literally a video they can watch doing it. That's immensely helpful. And I know the kickback is always like, oh, but if I make a video, everyone will tell that it's low quality and no one will want to book with me. And I'm telling you right now, you don't need to be Steven Spielberg. People are going to look at your listing. They're going to see fantastic photos, and it's always a positive if you have a video tour, regardless of whether you shot it on a GoPro or an iPhone or a calculator. Like, it just doesn't matter. Being able to show them that level of personalization and that level of this is real, what you're coming to is real, because everyone has that anxiety when they show up, right? Like, what if the thing isn't there? How do I even find it? Like, what if I can't find the key? Where's the host? Kind of things like that. You can kill all of those anxieties and make it such that their guests can be a lot more autonomous. They can figure out things, right? And also, I know a lot of you more experienced hosts know one of the biggest problems is our guests who have a problem don't mention it, and then they put it on your review. Video tours get rid of that, a lot of that, right? Because you can cover anything. Number 3, the repeatable, oh, it's nothing gift. This is one of the ones that I kind of experimented with, and I've just tested just to death. This is one of my favorite things you can do. What it is if you're experimenting with this, you have a guest, and you give them a gift. It's always something, right? Aren't they always ecstatic? They're always happy. It's amazing. And it doesn't even matter what you give them. It's the fact that you gave them a gift. It makes such a difference in their experience. All of a sudden, it's like, yes, this is the reason why I booked Airbnb. Yes, all those positive reviews were true. I call this, it's an experience smoother. And the reason why I put this into automation is because it's one of these things that you can deploy. And if you deploy it consistently, it's always something that will minimize the amount of complaints or issues that you have. And it's always something. I mean, I've had people have issues, and then you get a gift, and all of a sudden it's just like water under the bridge, right? And now the reason why I call it, oh, it's nothing, and why I say it's repeatable is because what you can do is you can put together some kind of a gift package, something that has personality, something that everybody likes, and you can try to minimize the cost and then buy it in bulk and give it to everyone. I know this sounds like mass manufactured, but not really. I mean, if you're focusing on maximizing their guest experience, then this is not actually a bad thing. I mean, it's something that really does lighten their stay. It automatically improves their mood even. So like, I'll give you an example. What I do, I give a bottle of wine and I give some chocolates. Now, the reason I picked those two is because, well, one reason, everybody likes chocolate. And if they don't like chocolate, they like wine. Unless you get some like super religious couple that can't drink and they brought their dog, so they're afraid of opening the chocolate. It's a really like outside case. But they always love that. That's a very good guess, right? And even if like the 15% of people who don't use either one of it, you still get the boost, the bonus, right? All of a sudden they're like, this guy is really thoughtful. This host is really thoughtful. And then I added some personalization to it. So I live in San Francisco, and we're right around Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley. And so what I did was I bought my favorite wine, and it comes from an area called Lodi Valley. Lodi Valley is like the younger sister to Sonoma and Napa. I don't want to call it the ugly little sister because I think it's pretty, but it's not nearly as pretty as the other two. And I got them this bottle of wine that I love. It's a Zinfandel. And I always put this note, right? Like, everybody comes for Napa Valley, but they don't know that Lodi Valley is much better and cheaper. And so I put that, and like all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, this guy is local. He knows what's up, and he gave us the lowdown. What a great, personable, like localized gift, something that's specific to the area, specific to their experience. And also, I have people all the time say like, oh, like we're just so crammed for time. We never get to vacation enough. And it really was terrible that we couldn't go see Napa Valley. But the fact that we got to drink a Zinfandel from the area and from an area you say is better, that just made it up for them, right? It's like they didn't even have to go. And the other one was chocolates. I live right next to Ghirardelli Square. I'm not originally from San Francisco, so if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. I'm from Kansas. And I live right down the street from it, and they have these little like squares, these Ghirardelli squares that everybody likes, and they're very iconic. And a lot of people come and see the Ghirardelli Square. Literally, like what I started doing was I would just like go down there, and this is kind of random, but they have these people handing out free squares, and I would just walk past them and just walk in circles until I had like 10 to 15 of them. And then I'd go and put them in a bin, and I'd put them in a little nice tin and give them to the guests. They love that, right? Everybody loves chocolate. Like, oh, something went wrong, the heat broke, but I have chocolate. And that's kind of like the response you see. It's a experience smoother. And then obviously what I started doing was just buying it in bulk, and bulk got it reasonable. And that's, you know, it's like a $7 gift for me. Like that wine plus the chocolates end up being like $7.50 or something like that. And so literally when I book someone, I like factor that into my cost. Like, oh, they booked it for, you know, $300 a night. Well, it's more like $293 because I got to give them the, oh, it's nothing gift. Yeah, so that's one of those things. And then in my course, I talk about how you can figure out what's a good gift for your area. How do you find ways of getting it cheaply and repeatable? Number 4, checkout times and buffer zones. Checkout times, wow. When you first start listing Airbnb, it's very important that you try to be flexible on your checkout times because, again, remember, we're starting at a disadvantage. You shouldn't have minimum days, and you shouldn't have checkout and check-in times because you want to capture as many people as possible because you want to get the bookings on your system and get that search credit so that you can actually start getting serious amounts of inquiries. But once you start to automate this, and once you have a little bit of experience and a little bit of social proof and review base, then you want to start actually enforcing your check-in and check-out times. It's really important. If you try to travel abroad with flexible check-in and check-out, it's not gonna work. When I had flexible check-ins and check-outs, it was literally 70% of the management I had to deal with. Because literally, to have someone be like, "Oh, can I check out at 2? Let me check with the other guest." And then I check with the other guest, and then not yet. And then I go to the second guest. Then they say, no, actually, can I check in early? And then I have to like figure out who wins in the check. It's not worth it. If you tell them up front what it is, they know when they have to be out. They know when they can be in. Makes it that much easier. Buffer zones then are incredibly important too, because you need to figure out how many things have to change in between listings. And how long is that going to take? And always give yourself more time. Buffer, buffer, buffer. I mean, like you might think, oh, it's terrible that someone has to check in after 3 p.m. Well, I mean, that's much better than your cleaner is late 45 minutes or late an hour or sick, and you have to scramble to get it clean, and they show up and it's dirty. Much better scenario where they just know that they can't come till 3. And like you can always show them places to drop off their bags. You know, I always let them drop off the bags at my place. So those are really important if you want to keep your sanity and you want to keep the trains moving on time. And if you have those, honestly, then it's just like all of a sudden the check out, check in, it's a non-event. Number 5, this is a mental exercise that I always suggest to hosts to do. Try to identify all of your moving parts. And now what do I mean by that? Try to identify all the things in your apartment that have to change from listing to listing, or from booking to booking, sorry. What has to move in order to satisfy the next booking, okay? Chances are you have to wash the sheets, right? You need fresh towels. In my case, I have to swap the keys out if you give the key to the next person. I have to give my parking pass to the next person. You have to, there's a lot of things that you would be surprised that you have to kind of catalog in your head about what's going to change, okay? And once you've identified all those moving parts, it makes it so much simpler because in my case, like I really only have 4 things. Like it's linens, it's the gift, and it's the some of the things that the cleaner has to do. And I actually listed those out and realized that's the only thing that actually has to change. It became a lot easier for me to understand how I can make it, because that's all that I have to address. So all they had to do was come up with a system for making sure that each one of those things was in the right spot, and if it wasn't, how to find it, how to get it to the next person. So once you can boil that down, then you know what the moving parts are, and then you can incorporate those into your buffer zones and incorporate those into the system that you build, into how you train your cleaner or what you tell them, how you do this, because they know what to focus on, and it just gives you peace of mind. Okay, so this is another question that Jim wanted me to go off on. Tip keeping secure. And I'll be honest, this is a question I get this all the time. My course has 3,500 people in it. And this is a question that I get frequently. Now, there's one thing I need you to understand, and a lot of prospective hosts are probably like peeking their ears right now, thinking like, oh yes, this is the #1 question preventing me from hosting. What you need to understand is that the only people who ask this question are prospective hosts. The people who have hosted once never ask this question again. I've never had someone host and then ask me this question. It's because it is just so, once you do it, it's like, oh, it's just not, it's so much simpler than you think. It's not as big of a deal as you think. But there are ways of minimizing the anxiety around it. I mean, a lot of people do have anxiety about how to keep their space secure. What happens if something gets broken? What happens if something disappears? Okay. So I've compiled some tips for at least giving you peace of mind and how I tackle the problem. So #1, you need to understand how the host guarantee works. This is usually kind of the corker in this conversation. So Airbnb will give you up to $1 million in damage rectification. It's an insurance policy that as long as you have hosted with Airbnb, they're going to give you, okay? And a lot of people don't understand what this covers. And I'll be honest, it's not something that like tons of people know intimate details about, because how often do you even have to use it? I have the luxury of knowing these things because I have multiple properties and I have thousands of students, okay? They cover everything you could think of. I mean, they cover theft, fire, damage, damage to anything, really, your walls, payouts for like noise. I mean, they don't cover if a meteor hits your place, right? But your homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover that anyway. So you need to understand, like, what are the things that you're worried about happening? Is it them stealing something from you? Okay, well, that's covered in the host guarantee. So at least you can get the money value back. You worried about damage? Okay, well, Airbnb covers that. The only time this would be a concern is if your house is over $1 million, right? Then it's the potential, if they burnt down your house, you'd only get $1 million back out of your $10 million house, Mitt Romney. So if you understand how this guarantee works, that kind of gets rid of 90% of the issues here. They cover really anything, and Airbnb is a very good company to work with. They're very understanding. They are very helpful, and they're not out here to make a margin. They're not like say another sharing economy company like Uber, who apparently has different incentives. Airbnb they're very good about this stuff, honestly. I mean, they always rectify the situation. They get a lot of flack for what happens, in the press, but if you also read in between the lines, they're always there. I mean, they've gone above and beyond to help people in bad situations. It's just the press, honestly, does not always give them a fair representation. So #2, you need to declutter your space. That's something that every host has to do. I mean, you just need to understand that if you're a guest and you're booking a space, you don't want to come into a space that has pictures of your family everywhere, or the soccer photos, or your poster of your favorite band from when you're in 6th grade and things like that. And that's a sacrifice you do have to make. People, when you list, you need to make it a little less personalized, because it's just kind of weird when you like take over someone's life and you're sitting in their living room and you've taken over their body. But one of the things you need to do, and this is just a standard practice, you need to declutter your space. And so when you do that, you'll make an identification list of the things that would be valuable to you if you had, let's say, lost it. I always say, move that to the side. Honestly, And you might think like, oh, that doesn't solve the problem. You're just kicking the can down the road. But the problem isn't that the stuff's going to get stolen. It's the fact that you have anxiety about it. Because I can cover on all the reasons why the anxiety is not logical. I mean, it's reasonable, but it's not logical. But if you move it to the side, say like you take all your valuable stuff and you put it in one closet, it's much easier to mentally manage. You can think to yourself, oh, I just have this one room and it's locked away. No one can ever access that, and it's got all my stuff. Or I have this closet. Everything is in that closet. And so you don't have that worry like, oh, maybe someone's going to accidentally stumble upon my stash of treasure, right? And honestly, this isn't really a huge problem unless you're like Scrooge McDuck and you just store gold coins everywhere and you've lost track of all of them. Use a small safe for small items. So the one point you'll get me to agree with you on whether if there's a security issue with Airbnb is the small items thing. And I'm going to talk on that in the next point a little bit more. But one of the ways that you can help with small items is, since small items can have very high value, like your phone, like your jewelry, like mementos or your grandparents' World War II medals, is you can get a small safe and put those in a safe. And these are surprisingly cheap. You can get one at Ace Hardware or whatever hardware store you're near for cheap. And you can get them on Amazon, honestly. And they're, even with shipping, it's like $40. It can be a small little safe with a button that you press. And you open it up, and it can fit more than you'll ever need. So you don't need like a gunmetal safe to store all your stuff. But you can at least feel safer about the small items because you can put them away. And these are things like you never bring with you, or maybe if you're hosting a shared space, so you can leave the house without carrying everything you own on you. Okay, and so this brings me to my other point. This is the most effective way that I tackle the problem. The biggest issue with security with Airbnb is there could potentially be small items that are stolen that you do not realize, right? That's the insidious problem, right? It's not a problem of my TV is missing, like they stole my computer. It's an issue of they swiped my iPad, or something small and valuable is missing. And what can happen, and this is where it becomes a problem, is if, say, you have back-to-back bookings, what if you don't realize something's gone until 5 bookings later? Because it's a small item. You don't see it every time you walk into the room. So what exactly do you do? This is the way that I did it, and it's very effective. When you have your cleaner come, the first thing they do is they have a checklist. They go through your space and they look for all of the things that you have said are very valuable to you, and they make sure that they're there. They literally go and physically, identify it and confirm that it's there. And I always have my cleaners do videos too. That also helps with any damage claims. But they can show videos of it because maybe your cleaner doesn't know exactly what you're talking about. But after a couple times, they'll know exactly what it is. And you can watch the videos of my cleaner. They're hilarious. It's always like, Evan, yes, your computer is still here. Yes, Evan, your TV is still on the wall. But if I didn't have that, honestly, and something disappeared, I would have no idea who did it. And that is as good as gone. And Airbnb, unfortunately, I don't know if they would cover that because it's like, oh, it's gone. I don't know who took it. I don't know when it was gone, but trust me, it was here. So you want to avoid any kind of gray area. That's how you do it. That's how you know every single thing's there. And if it is gone, then you know how to use the host guarantee and you know how to use your security deposit. And also, honestly, and this is one thing I always think about, if you have something that is like valueless, like memento, family heirlooms, that is something you might consider using safe, putting in a safe, or if you can't, putting in storage. Just those things just in case, right? Because even if Airbnb can give you tons of money for it, is that really going to make up for it? So if you do have items like that, then I think it is worthwhile thinking about ways of moving those or securing those. So this is one thing that a lot of people don't realize, and it's actually kind of shocked me because I learn things every week. I was looking at this like a couple weeks ago. If you really wanted to, you could get extra insurance, like vacation rental insurance, and it is not very expensive. My apartment is probably worth like it's because of San Francisco, like $1 million. If I wanted to cover Airbnb's $1 million policy and cover everything in my building, I think my quote was like $130 a month. Like it's really not very expensive, right? And if you own your home, a lot of people say, "Oh, I own my home. I can get home, insurance, homeowners insurance." And while that's a good idea to get additional because it's so cheap, right? Like homeowners insurance is very cheap on a month-to-month basis. That actually, I don't usually suggest doing that because homeowners insurance will deny you if you have stipulations in your agreement about renting on Airbnb because they'll see it as a business. But look into extra insurance if it really is something that you think is worthwhile. If your building is more valuable than the $1 million, think about this. Think about using additional insurance. Oh, and yes, so what I've been doing with myself for the last like 4 months, I made a course, and on that course, I talk in depth about every single thing I know about it. And the reason why I came up with this course was because, at a certain point, like I had plateaued as a host. I was just doing really well. And I think I had a friend who made online courses, and he just said to me, like, Evan, you have thought about Airbnb more than anyone I'd ever met. And so it kind of became like an exercise for me because I wanted to make online courses. And that was some kind of experiment to start with. And so I started with Airbnb, and I put everything I knew into it. And it ended up being like 15 hours of content and 118 lectures. And I'm adding to it every week as I think of more things. And so I put that together. And that is something that is a fantastic resource if you guys out there want to have a comprehensive understanding of becoming a host or replicating my success. And honestly, the reception I've had is fantastic. Like I have 3,400 students. I have 600 plus discussion threads. So there's 600 discussions between hosts about what are the best things to do, what has happened, what are some of the things they've never thought would happen that happened, or what are the best practices, everything like that. And honestly, I'm on there. Like I interact with my students every single day. My average response time is like 30 minutes to responses. I give out my phone number to my students. I've had them call me during hosting emergencies, and I work with every single one of them because I honestly love doing it. It's great for me because like I want to perfect my craft, and it always just amazes me how many different scenarios that can happen. And how I can get better at it. But also the thing is that when you start off, there's just like no reason that you have to go through that trough of sorrow where you're trying to figure out everything on your own, or say you're a host that just plateaued. Honestly, you can just take my course and learn every single thing I did, listen to it on the weekend, implement it that week. And honestly, one of the best things I've had throughout this entire course are some of the turnaround stories I've had with guests, or I'm sorry, with students. Like literally this week, I have a guy named Brian. He's hosting in Nashville, Tennessee, and he bought my course. And he said to me, Evan, I've had my thing up for like 2 weeks. I've only been getting a couple inquiries, and I haven't made a single booking. And over the weekend, he took my entire course. He listened to it on like 2x playback or something. So he listened to me sounding like a chipmunk, I guess. Took the entire thing. Took my listing, took all of my tips. I literally went to his thing and confirmed every single thing he did. Went to my listing, imported it in. He copied my templates for my descriptions, my templates for photos, my comments, everything. And he did it. So he took the course Saturday, Sunday, took the changes, posted it on Monday. On Tuesday, he booked $5,000. And so now if you go and look at his listing, it's currently like Swiss cheese because he's almost at like 60% fill rate for the next 4 months. And he's charging $600 a night. So that's the thing. It's like a lot of people, they start and they have a horrible beginning and they hit page 8 and they give up. And honestly, and that's why if you look at hosts, there's so many hosts out there who have just given up. And the thing is, you can be successful really with any space. Maybe you don't make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you can make it worthwhile and make it seriously improve your life. And the only other thing I said was it's 54 5-star reviews. I'm holding my breath until someone posts and says, Evan, you've done a terrible job. I want my money back. But that's never happened. So maybe you can be the first one. So yeah, those are the questions that Jim wanted me to cover. And I hope I've done them justice. I think live viewers, I am at your mercy.
Evan, wow, that is a lot of great stuff you just dropped on us right there. I feel like I just went through Airbnb boot camp and to like think this is only a very small portion of your course.
I hope I'm not like a drill sergeant.
No, it was amazing. I'm sitting here like, man, I'm writing little tips down for myself
I'm
for our
parched.
little business here. So it's fantastic, awesome information. I'd like to go over a few questions and then take questions from the audience. So, audience, if you have any questions, you can email them to info@learnairbnb. Evan's going to be around for a little bit. We're going to answer some live questions that I have, and then whatever you guys like to contribute as well. So let's just jump right into them. Evan, what's been like your most costly mistake as an Airbnb host? Just, whether it's waiting too long to do a certain thing or to purchase something, or you purchase something you shouldn't have purchased. What's been the biggest costly mistake for you?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem being so testy, like I try to test, not testy, like I'm a bad, angry person, but I test everything. And so a lot of times I test things and they don't work. That is true. Like when I play around with my response rate, oh yeah, I left some money on the table. So it's kind of like my pain is your gain in this type of situation. Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of situations like that. I've developed quite a thick skin towards, like bad things that have happened. Like, I think one of the more expensive things I've made mistakes with are like, for instance, not paying attention to price fluctuations in your area. And I've had situations where like people will come and they'll book out the space and they kind of have this like attitude like they came from VRBO. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with VRBO, but you book the place and you don't pay till you show up, right? And so they have this thing, like they show up and they're like, I'd rather pay double for the Hilton or something like that, right? Or the hotel down the street for some reason dropped 80% of their price. That happened to me one time. So yeah, that was one of the things. I guess not having my finger on the ball a couple times had caused me some issues, and I guess that was more expensive.
That makes sense.
It's one of those things I'd have to think about because I'm sure there's like tons of things that I've lost money. It's just like I'm one of those people that I look at the money that deposits and not the money that could have deposited.
Yeah, and that's good. That's a good way to look at your business. I'm sure there's probably some more lectures you can come up with on costly mistakes and things that to not test. Obviously because you've taken the time to do that. And that's great that people can stand on your shoulders and really see what is the opportunity for an awesome and excellent Airbnb host. Next question I have is like, what's the biggest headache you face as being a remote Airbnb host?
Keys.
Keys.
Man, that is a conversation you do not want to get. I mean, like a message you do not want to get. Stranded guests. I've had them go out drinking and get locked out. And the whole family's been locked out before. And the reason why this is my pain point is because my building was built in 1914. And so my locks are like straight up like Civil War era. They are super old. And so there's only like 2 keys that can open the space. And so whenever people ask me like, oh, how do I automate the key swap process? I always direct people to this really cool technology that's come out in the last like year. There are automatic lock systems, which are absolutely kind of blow my mind. One of them was a Kickstarter program that came out, and they're called Lockatron. Another one's called Open Sesame. And there's a couple other, if you go on Amazon and look for electronic locks. And what they are these locks that retrofit to the back of your door. So if you have a traditional deadbolt or just a traditional door with a tiny little nipple that you turn, they can literally attach to the back of it and then automate your lock system. And the way that they work is they detect when someone is near the door with their phone. And that person can text message to open the door. They can hold their phone up with Bluetooth. I think they can, if you have an iPhone, it uses like that AirPlay magic. And they have like 6 different ways you can get in the door and ways that you can authorize like who you want to let in during what periods of time. Also, it tells you who comes in and who comes out. This is a problem for me because my door is so old that they don't make a system that's going to be able to handle my this like antique door that I have. But people have had really, really good success automating that system. And it works honestly in like situations where, so a lot of my guests are out of country, and so they don't have a workable phone. Well, they can literally like walk down to the coffee shop and use like a login, just log into like a public computer or anything like that and unlock the door as long as they have access to it, that you gave it to them, right? Or they can message you in some way, contact you, and you can remotely let them in. So that's a fantastic resource if you can do that for your door. Much better than what I did for a year, which is like stick the key under the mat, which I know like the security people, the people who are worried about security are just like probably holding their breath after I said that. And it was probably not the smartest thing in the world, and it had a lot of problems, sure.
All right, well, it sounds like automated locks is going to save a lot of headaches for a lot of people, and I like that you can track who is coming in and out of your place and how often. That's a very good little feature of those things. You mentioned the airbed and the high quality airbed. What are some other really good investments that you've made for your Airbnb unit that really make you stand out? Or if not even to stand out, like what is one thing you're glad you put the cash outlay for and it's like paid you over 10 times the amount?
Oh man, I mean the parking was a fantastic example. The parking, I paid $100 a month, and like I could literally quantify the amount of bookings it got me per month. And it was easily, 10x, 15x.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things like that. Like what I started doing was, people love this one. Oh my God. So people go to Alcatraz, and Alcatraz, it's a big icon, right? Well, the thing about Alcatraz is it books out early. So what I started doing was like buying tickets in bulk and being like, hey, come here, I have your Alcatraz tickets. Last second, still go to Alcatraz, right? I was basically like a ticket scalper. Things like that, right? Like really, like who else can compete with that? Who cares enough to compete with that?
Yeah, you put a lot of time in for that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like, oh man, disappointing it is when people like show up and they're like, oh, we wanted to see Alcatraz, but we didn't realize you had to book it a month in advance.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you are the hero. But yeah, things like that. Like they're all augmentable. And in my course, I just go over like tons and tons of these things you can do.
All right. Good. Well, those are some good ones to consider. I didn't even think about buying tickets, but that's a good idea since they do sell out soon or earlier. What are your thoughts on using automated pricing, or do you prefer to keep it very simple and just have maybe 3 or 4 prices and just check on special events? What are your thoughts on the automated pricing trends that we're seeing nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of these like service tools that are popping up for Airbnb, trying to handle cleaning, management, messaging, pricing. I am honestly lukewarm on pricing, and it's one of those things a lot of my students ask me about. They're like, hey, have you tried this, such and such service? And the reason why for me is because in my personal experience, they haven't been particularly helpful. So for those of you who are not aware, when you log into your Airbnb will suggest a price for you, and Airbnb has a lot of data to work with. And for a lot of people, they're accurate. But when I do it, for some reason, my $500 a night listing that books out a year in advance, by the way, I have people booking I think the farthest one was 18 months in advance. It tells me to list it at like $250, right? Because something is wrong. Like they're not capturing what essence is allowing me to book more. And that is a problem that I've noticed with a lot of the tools out there. So a lot of the tools out there have kind of tackled this problem of like, what do I price it at? And also people don't want to be at their calendar all the time to constantly be fiddling with it. So it leaves out a lot of these like intangibles that really do make a difference in your listing. Some of those tools out there, they don't really take into consideration reviews, right? How do they take into consideration, for instance, an emphatic review? Someone who writes an emphatic review might as well just add $50 to your per night cost, right? Because that is just like one person just had a fantastic, you saved their marriage, right? How is that tool going to take into consideration that, how good of a host you are? I also didn't really like the fact that like they overly skew towards events. So like I live in San Francisco and it'll be like, Evan, you should raise your price 40% for outside lands. Okay, first of all, I'm not going to charge $800 a night. And second of all, no hands. Like no one's booking my space for that, like that music concert. So they're kind of like painting with broad strokes. And I understand theoretically how that would make sense. And I'm sure for some people it does. It's just not like a perfect solution. So it kind of is a wash for me. I think also that they're great if you're someone who is like, I'm going to put this up and I want to automate everything, right? Like I just want it to run. And that's just not who I am. Like I'm the type of person that's like, no, I'm quite invested in I have entire lectures on how you can price your calendar correctly, and how you can go through and know how to, like, for instance, if the listing is open tomorrow, lower the price till it books, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, those pricing tools don't do that. They actually don't. I mean, it's like they don't take into consideration that, hey, an unbooked room is lost money. So
Exactly.
I think these are solvable problems for these tools out there. And I think that they're getting a lot better. And I've seen that, like, over their iteration cycles, as they've come out with new versions, they're getting better and better and better. Just for me, not yet. Maybe call me old school.
That makes sense, and it's it's good. It's a system that you have that's manual. It's can be really unbroken if you really know what you're doing, and if it's not as difficult as people make it out to be. But as you said, the automatic pricing is good for people that want to put things on, set it and forget it, and let it roll.
Sure.
Yep. We have a question from one of our viewers, Lynn. How do you handle bad reviews? Do you respond to them? Do you get all up in arms? Do you freak out about it? What do you do when you have a bad review? I mean, I'm sure you haven't had one, but you probably throughout fielding questions from your course, people have had bad reviews. What advice do you give to people who have bad reviews?
After I'm done, like, swearing off Airbnb forever. No, it's happened to me. Honestly, I'm not an angel. I've had not really like overtly negative, but not happy. Well, okay, so yeah, actually, in my course, I do have a framework that I had kind of developed over 2.5 years for how I address negative reviews. And there are a lot of techniques that you can use to not only prevent them, but get rid of them. And I cover in my course some of the more controversial techniques that I don't necessarily endorse. But if you kind of look at it from, okay, what are the main concerns that are happening? What are they complaining about frequently, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can initially address those. Okay, well, maybe something happens that you did not anticipate, right? You can go and, for instance, using experience smoothing techniques, like GIFs are a fantastic way of preventing them before they happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different situations where, and then what you can do is when the review period comes up, this is what I always do, right? I always message them my review first, and then I tell them what I put, right? Really hard for someone to give you a negative review if you just told them that you gave them a positive review, right? Mm-hmm. That'll kill 60% in the bud right there. But should you ever get to the nuclear option where someone actually post it, there are some options. I mean, you can still continue a dialogue with them, and consider the economic impact of what this is going to do to your listing, right? If it's the case that you're not going to be running for a while, maybe you don't want to address it. But if it's the case that seriously hurt you and seriously damage your income in the future, what's that worth to get rid of? And you can buy them off. I mean, that's a lot of times. A lot of times people are giving reviews, and it's not because like they didn't feel like you're responsive. They feel like the amount they paid isn't matched to the experience they got, right? Well, if you lower the amount of money, you can kind of reach an equilibrium point, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's like, hey, I'll give you $200 back. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't ever want this to be the case. I work hard, and make sure that they understand your circumstance, right? Like, people are human.
Yes.
They ultimately want you to change something, right? They want you to improve. Not everybody out there is callous. They don't want to like scar you with something forever. They just want to feel like their issue's been rectified.
Yeah, they want to be heard, and they just want to, be noticed and be taken care of.
Yeah.
And like you said, it can be nipped in the bud. It's being very proactive and getting your guest review out there, and let them know. I think that's a fantastic tip. It's something we explain on our website as well. Just really make sure that you're getting and being proactive about this review system.
Seriously, and give them an outlet for giving you feedback, right?
Yeah,
that's another one. I always text my guests when I'm in town, in the middle of their thing. I'll like text them and be like, anything I can help with, right? Because I do not want a submarine issue. I don't want something to pop up only on the review, right? So if you give them the opportunity to feel heard, the opportunity to voice their concerns, okay, then yeah, I mean that kills most of them.
That's good. Instant Book, it's a feature that a lot of hosts use. At what point do you recommend hosts start using Instant Book, or should they be screening all their guests, down to the T? Or what are your thoughts on Instant Book?
Well, I mean, so first of all, you know my opinion on security, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's very lax.
I'm like open borders. Anybody come, anybody go.
Yeah.
um, yeah, instant book. So typically when I'm working with someone or talking to one of my guests or one of my students on the phone, I tell them this is something that you need to wait till you have some stripes, right? You need to wait till you've had some bad experiences, know you can respond to them. And you've gotten to a point where it's become a little bit redundant, right? Like, you know all the things that can go wrong. You know the main issues. You know how to solve them. You need to wait till you've been in the dirt a little bit before you do instant book. But if you want to maximize your income, instant book you have to do it. I'm sorry. Like, if you don't have instant book, you're not going to be on the front page. And obviously, like, some people don't care because they can get plenty of bookings on the second page and third page. And that's, power to you. But if you're trying to maximize, then you should do instant book, to be honest. And the thing people need to understand is that, like, a lot of people have issues with instant book because, like, anybody could show up, right? Like, some just goblin is going to show up that you would have screened out. Airbnb does. I mean, you could set this in your instant book. I forget. You can set this in your instant book. You can always say, like, only instant book to people who have positive reviews. You can say only instant book to people who have been ID verified, right? So you are technically screening them. And the thing is, once you become popular, like, the people that are booking my space, I wouldn't even have enough time or information to make a decision about whether or not I want them to book, right?
Yeah.
So you have to plan for all comers and plan accordingly. And that should set you up to do instant book. At instant book, like, no joke, it'll bump your revenue by 20, 30%. Like, Airbnb is not joking when they put that stat.
Yeah, more money or more people means more money, and that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, more choice too. If you do want to be choosy.
Exactly. So that kind of leads into the next question. How do you minimize the risk of squatters or nightmare type of guests? Because we see the media sensationalizing a lot of the bad stuff, and I know that kind of keeps I hear my mother talk to me about Airbnb. She gets all real nervous about it. But it's not something we should be scared of. How do you minimize the risk of squatters or nightmare type of guests? Do you have any tips for that?
Squatters, man. Yeah, these are all over the news, aren't they?
And it's a very small percentage, but I think it's something that people think about. It crosses their mind. Do you have any thoughts for that?
The amount of people that actually have squatted in Airbnb bookings, it's like a rounding error. Like, I'm literally, like, how many times have they had this happen? 10 times. You know how many bookings they've had? Seriously, like, what is it, like 100 million or something? So your odds of, like, getting struck by lightning 3 times in a row, or, like, what's that stat? Like, getting attacked by a polar bear and a grizzly bear in the same day, that's roughly equivocal to having a squatter. So squatters, so what they're basically doing is taking advantage of local laws. Okay. And yes, this is a problem. San Francisco too. And here's a rumor you didn't hear from me. In San Francisco, there actually were a couple of nonprofits that were caught suggesting to people who are homeless that they use Airbnb as a squatting mechanism.
Wow.
Just wait, what kind of an NGO is that? Seriously. So the ways that you get around this, one, and you'll notice this with all of these types of guest interactions, is that there's a certain point at which you get tenants' rights, right? And some places have insanely low requirements, some have reasonable ones, right? But the point is that like all of these stories, if you look at them, it's like, well, the guy, I rented him to him for 2 months. Okay, you're renting it for 2 months. The guy's a tenant, right? And you need to plan for that. So one of the things is just like scrutinize more if you're getting these 2-month rentals, right? Honestly, if you're interested in doing a month-long rental, get a traditional sublet. I mean, who's going to pay the like per night hotel cost or the per night tourist cost to rent this for a month anyway? God, that should throw off some red flags anyway, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Do not ever take money off of the system. It's not worth it. It just isn't worth it, right? Like, and that's another one, like the squatter in Sarasota or whatever. She got caught because it's like, she took money off the system, right? And then the guy lied about how long he was in the building and had no way of proving it, right?
Yeah.
So Airbnb thought he was there for like a month. He claimed he was there for like 3 months or whatever the threshold was to get tenants' rights. And that's how he got around it. So just don't do that, for one. Scrutinize long-term bookings too. And then do some basic research, honestly. Like, you can figure it out very quickly how long you have to be in a space where you have tenants' rights. In San Francisco, like, don't quote me on it, but it's like 2 weeks or something, right?
Yeah.
I've never had a 2-week rental. So be aware of what, try to scrutinize it as much as possible. If this does happen and you are that person who's like the most unlucky person in the world, Airbnb has been quite fantastic. I mean, if, like, that's again one of those stories. Like, local news story, like news outlets love harping on this stuff, right? They love harping on the Airbnb orgy that happened in New York City, probably because it's hilarious. But they always like talk about, you know, this is the terrible thing that happened. They have like one sentence about what Airbnb did, and that's just totally not fair. Airbnb like wired them huge chunks of money. They hired surveillance teams. They paid for all the legal fees. They put them in like a better apartment across town. Like, it's just, you guys have aligned incentives. They'll take care of you. But in general, yeah, I mean, it's an issue, but if you just try to be a little more thoughtful about how you plan for long-term guests, and try not, I wouldn't use Airbnb for a long-term guest. That's, I mean, probably the biggest one.
Yeah, exactly. That can take away 99% of the risk right there. You know, if someone's asking for, you know, a very extended stay, to show up the red flags right away.
Like if, you know, if like the cutoff date was like 24 days to be a tenant, or to get tenants laws, and they'll stay for 25 days. You know, like, come on, like, how'd you pick 25 days?
Exactly.
Is that your real name?
Exactly. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. I checked our email. There's not really any other questions, but we do have a special offer for the guests that were able to stick around to the end. Evan has been very, very generous to offer his course for a limited time price of $49. You just have to visit learnairbnb.com/course to take advantage of this offer. It will not last long. It's a limited time offer. You know, Evan, you've given us so much knowledge in just this past hour and a half. I can only imagine how deep the course goes. You said it's about 15 hours and 118 lectures, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's getting longer, too, as I get more and more feedback and we turn those into more. I've already come up with a couple more lectures from this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Good. So, you know, we'll post the details up on the event page, but make sure that you guys take advantage of this very generous offer from Evan. And you know, make sure you take advantage of this. It's something that if you're not educating yourself and not keeping up with the new developments and how to become a better host, you just won't be successful or as successful as you possibly could be. I'm going to check one more time.
And you get to bug me with tons and tons of questions, right?
Exactly. You have an instructor on demand all the time. That, you know,
a personal tutor.
Yeah, personal tutor for Airbnb. And you said your response time is only about 30 minutes or an hour, what so have you. But you know, you've done a lot
Unless
to
I'm
help.
sleeping.
Yeah, right? Unless you're sleeping. But you've done a lot to actually propel hosts into that super host status. And what I want the viewers to know is that can happen for them too if they take advantage of taking this course. Let me check one more time to see if there's any more questions. And if not, we will let you go. Let me see one more time. I do not see anything else coming through. So again, Evan, thank you very much for taking the time to explain how to become a super host to the Learn Airbnb community. To the viewers, if there's any questions that pop up, if you're watching this on a replay, please make sure you can email us at info@learnairbnb.com and take advantage of that special offer, learnairbnb.com/course, and you can save $250 on the Airbnb host training course today. Evan, again, thank you very much. We really, really, really appreciate your time.
Cool. It's been fun. Thanks, Jim.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.